Welcome to the CodePrep Podcast, the podcast that shows you how you can get into tech. Today's guest is Anna Sedlar. Anna has a degree in Earth and Environmental Sciences. After a few years of working in this field, she decided she wanted to make a change, so she packed up and moved from Michigan to Georgia, where she attended the coding bootcamp at Digital Crafts. After graduating, she got a job as a software engineer specializing in React development. Last year, she was also a teaching assistant at another coding bootcamp here in Atlanta at Georgia Tech. She is also a speaker. So let's get started. Anna, can you tell me why you decided to leave your career in Earth and Environmental Sciences and how you transitioned into tech?
Hello, yes, I'm happy to. So previous to this tech life, I was working in a lab and we were studying something really cool. It was sustainable biofuels from algae. And I was doing that while I was a student. When I hit graduation, I was sort of offered this path of keep working at this lab, get your master's degree, kind of continue as is. And that seriously just did not appeal to me. I think I was really eager to sort of just get a different perspective on life. I wanted to do some traveling and I wanted to sort of see what else was out there, along with the fact that not too many of the jobs that were easily available to me with just a bachelor's in Earth and Environmental Sciences, none of them really appealed to me. I think I would have to get like further education in that field if I were to do something significant or something fulfilling. So because of that, I decided to actually take off and I traveled for a little bit right after I graduated. So that was good. I got to sort of see the world in a sort of a little interlude, and I came back to Michigan with kind of the confusion that you have, you know, as a college graduate. I didn't have a job yet and I had just returned to the States. So I was always curious, I was always intrigued by tech and by, you know, computers in general, and I had absolutely no idea how they worked. I've never programmed or coded or done anything technical besides basically internet browsing to that day. So when I got back, it sort of set off maybe a year long of research into these coding schools. I had known one woman who did one, and she sort of transitioned to, you know, the San Francisco Bay Area, out of Michigan, just like I was. We went to the same school, so I was very curious. I was sort of following her path and kind of questioning how plausible, how possible that same path was for me. It sounded like a really, really sweet setup. So I was curious, but of course, coming from zero, it was a lengthy process of sort of research and validation and kind of questioning my motive to see if, one, I wanted to do tech, and two, if I was qualified or prepared or ready. And ultimately, the answer to those things were yes. So that's when I packed up and moved down to Georgia, to Atlanta, and I started the Digital Crafts Bootcamp. And at the time, it was, I think, 2 years or less old. It was one of the newer boot camps on the scene. So it was kind of a gamble, but all of the reviews were, 100 out of 100. So I kind of took a chance there, and I think it paid off.
I love that you mentioned that part of your decision making was, you know, is this right for me? I've definitely heard some people basically say, you know, I felt like I could make a living in this industry, so I figured out how to get into it, and now I'm there. And it's like, but at what point did you, you know, fall in love with it? Because if you're going to do this the rest of your life, you know, I can't think of a role in technology, especially in the realm of software development, that doesn't require passion, because you have to be learning the rest of your life.
Absolutely.
So what was it about it? Especially, I guess you're drawn to front-end React development in particular. Like, what was it that sparked that passion and joy and sort of let you know, not only is this a good career field, but it's the right one for me?
Absolutely. So I think that because I had an Earth and Environmental Science degree, which, like I said, was not technical at all. However, it was very analytical. So I was used to sort of like the process-driven, meticulous data collecting sort of work. So that was already like a big advantage in my case was that I was used to analytical work. And I think what happened when I decided that this was a good choice for me was Well, actually, it wasn't right when I started. It wasn't when I started the boot camp or even decided to get into it. It was a couple years or a couple months at least into working in the field when I realized how creative coding can be and how it sort of combines both that analytical side, but also the sort of creativity. Sort of, you get to work in like a genesis, like you're actually creating new apps, new features and apps, and that, is the exact definition of creativity. So I think I was for a long time under the impression that as a coder, you're just going to be sitting, beat bopping on your computer all day and it's just like a tedious, boring job. Luckily, I was very relieved to find that that's not always the case. Of course, you can find jobs that, sure, yeah, that description matches, but there are many, many jobs and plenty of them are creative and fulfilling and satisfying in that sort of balance to the analytical. Yeah.
Your coding bootcamp, that is a path that a lot of people use to transition into tech. Your coding bootcamp, even though you attended it when it was relatively new, has a unique twist in what they teach. Most coding bootcamps teach one tech stack, like they might teach JavaScript, and that's what you learn. Your text, your bootcamp actually taught two tech stacks.
Yes.
When people are looking at evaluating boot camps, do you think that that was beneficial to you to have learned two, or is one acceptable for people that are looking into that? What feedback and recommendations can you give to others?
So I think that certainly one is enough. However, if you have an opportunity to go to a school or a coding bootcamp that does at least give you some exposure to multiple languages or sort of multiple environments, I found that extremely valuable and extremely helpful. In my case, my bootcamp was primarily JavaScript focused, front and back end, and then we did also maybe 2 to 3 weeks of Python development. And I think more so than actually learning Python, because it's relatively easy to pick up, the value in that was showing me that, I can move beyond JavaScript. As JavaScript is sort of seen, as like the beginner language, it's kind of the feeder into tech almost. And I know without that sort of hand-holding at the beginning, I probably would have been intimidated and scared, and I wouldn't realize that I can transition to Python or to any other language, and it's not, like this big blocker and this big difference between two languages. So I think for me, my bootcamp was really wonderful at giving me the support and kind of the hand-holding that I really needed at the time when I was just starting out. So yeah, I would say, one is certainly enough. JavaScript is plenty fine. There are plenty of jobs available that are only doing JavaScript. But I think broadening your horizons is never a bad thing.
So from the time you graduated until you got, that first job in the industry that made you feel all the warm and fuzzies inside, how long was that time frame, and what was the process and the hustle like for you?
Absolutely. That's a great question. And that is another reason why I chose digital crafts. They had, I think, like I said, 2 cohorts that already graduated, which is nothing. And at the time, there were several other options in the Atlanta area. But I think what attracted me to digital crafts was the length of time. So most boot camps, at least in Atlanta, were 3 months. Digital crafts offered a 4-month boot camp, and I think that extra month at the end was, just exactly, what I needed. Month was more valuable than the 3 months itself, of course. So that was really attractive. And the other really attractive thing to me was that all the reviews that I read and everybody I reached out to, and I reached out to a lot of people, including Jennifer, everybody who went to this boot camp was saying that they were extremely helpful in their what they call career prep. So not only did they, review resumes and build portfolios as sort of an extracurricular, but they also, I guess you could call it sort of corporate partnerships in a way. They would reach out and have sort of coding whiteboard interview practices with these other companies in the industry. And basically they were really good at building these partnerships so that the companies could get familiar with bootcamp students and sort of paint a more accurate picture of a bootcamp grad. as well as sort of giving bootcamp students the in to these companies as well. So that's what happened with me. I didn't actually even know the company. I had never heard of the company that one of the career directors had sent my resume off to. And little did I know, in about 2 weeks after graduation, I was interviewing there and I had an offer signed within, I think it was within a month of graduating. And it kind of caught me by surprise. I was budgeting, for like 3 months out until I get a job. And it was just bang, bang, bang. It all happened so quickly. And I think, that's one of the benefits of doing my research and going to the right school for me.
That's great to know. A lot of people that attend a coding boot camp, one of the things that they're uncertain about is after they graduate, how long will it take me to get a job, or can I get a job, without having any real experience except for the coding boot camp.
Mm-hmm.
Based on your experience and the other people that were in your cohort at Digital Crafts, how long on average did it take people that graduated to get a job? And what recommendations can you give to people that helped you and helped others so that they can apply when they graduate from a coding boot camp?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the average for my cohort was maybe a month and a half to 2 months, which is, from my experience or my impression, pretty quick compared to the average around Atlanta. And granted, Atlanta is sort of a unique situation in my mind because there are plenty of new boot camps springing up all the time, and there's a lot of different programs being offered. So I think timing definitely has to do with it. However, I would say, yeah, the smart decision in my mind would be to budget and like make sure you have enough to go off of around 3 months of unemployment before you nail that job. And maybe you're like me and you get a job within 1 month, and then, that's a happy surprise. But I think that's unusual, especially, I'm not sure actually what the difference is, but I did have a job at the Georgia Tech Bootcamp afterwards as well, and I was a teaching assistant at this bootcamp, and it was quite different than Digital Crafts, where Digital Crafts had, a small, intimate, I think max was about 20 students. The Georgia Tech Bootcamp was more of a college class. It was nights and weekends, and it had about 80 students. So there was already just a lot more competition in a big class like that when everybody's graduating at the same time. So I would say that in that bigger environment, I did notice that students were getting jobs at longer intervals after graduation than the smaller, intimate sort of section. So I would take that into account if you are considering a boot camp. For me, I definitely appreciated the smaller, intimate size and the benefits that provides. However, I know the larger sort of college-style boot camps, they are cheaper, and they do offer nights and weekends a lot more often, which sometimes is the way you have to do it if you already have a full-time job or other obligations. But just, I would say it's very important to be mindful of the competition, if you can call it that, because there are certain, times in the hiring process throughout the year. Like right now in January, I feel like a lot of companies are, getting their budgets back on track, and they're looking to hire right now. So it would be a great time to be graduating from a boot camp when all these companies are looking for fresh talent. However, if you're graduating your boot camp in November, December, when things are slowing down, and then couple that with graduating with 80 people at the same time, it might be a little bit harder to sort of stand out amongst the crowd.
I definitely agree with that. It's weird. So I both attended and TA'd at the same boot camp at which you TA'd.
Mm-hmm.
And
yep.
We were given a little joke one day. They made some reference to work cooperatively now while you're on the same team because you're about to be each other's competition.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember looking at the guy next to me and thinking, this dude is 23, like half my age. He has no children, no partner. He lives with his parents
Mm-hmm.
in a completely different part of town than I live in, right? Different lifestyle, different everything. On what planet are we in competition for the same roles? He's not going to be looking for work-life balance, and he's not going to be looking in the same area of town. Why can't we all work together when every person in this room has different circumstances? So I was very lucky. I never really felt the competition,
Yeah.
thing, whatever that is. There's enough jobs for all of us.
Yeah.
But I did see some people fall into that, sort of stressed out. Um, we're all graduating at the same time. There's a limited number of jobs, except there aren't. There are so many jobs out there. Did you see that as a TA? How was the experience helping your students go through graduation and the job hunt and having, 70 other people graduate the same day?
Right, yeah. So luckily, even the larger boot camps usually set up career opportunity or career prep resources. I know there was a big job fair at the cohorts that I taught at or TA'd at. So we would have our companies come in and either they would set up a booth or our students would set up a booth with the people that they did their final projects with, and just sort of showcase the final project, which should be, the accumulation of all the effort of the program, just showing off the magnum opus of the coding bootcamp. So it was basically, again, a meet and greet, get to know you, kind of show a more accurate perception of bootcamp grads and what they're capable of, and just kind of, surveying on both ends, both whether you're looking for employment or employer or employees, what's out there. And there are, like you were saying, there are so many, and you might, as in a boot camp, feel this competition, but again, like you're saying, there are many, many jobs out there. And I think what it comes down to is really aligning yourself with what kind of position you want. And now I think it's important to also remember that any step into a job in tech, especially for someone like me who had no experience doing this, is the right step at the time. And especially if you have bills to pay, like I'm a strong advocate of taking what comes in the door first. But then once you get that first step, I think it's incredibly so much easier to get that second job. And that's what I did. I stayed at my first job for only 5.5 months, which is pretty short. Maybe not for the tech industry, but pretty short in, the professional world. And I was really worried that that would reflect badly on me and I'd have like a scar on my resume. But because I was transitioning to a company, into a job that I really respected and that really aligned with what I was looking for long term, it was absolutely the right decision. And I don't think I could have got that second perfect job had I not taken that first imperfect, not quite a match job at first.
Yeah.
One of the things that you mentioned was your coding boot camp was 4 months compared to a traditional boot camps, which are 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
That extra month helped you prepared and to get ready for your first job. One of the things, like you have done, Valerie did it also, was being a TA at the boot camp after you graduate.
Yes.
Do you think that helped you also to get ready for your first job? And would it be a path that you would recommend for others to consider if they complete a coding boot camp, to consider doing that to help them get ready for finding that first job?
Absolutely, 100%. I think that, the boot camps are great. Cramming knowledge into your brain in 3 to 4 to 6 months is amazing, but we also have to be realistic and know that not everything is going to stick in there at the pace that we're going. So for me, I think just personally, to feel really comfortable in what I learned and sort of consolidate that knowledge, I think being a teaching assistant or helping out at either the same coding bootcamp or, in my case, a different coding bootcamp was so important to me and to my growth. And actually what happened for me was I graduated my bootcamp and I got that first full-time job, and on the side, nights and weekends, I was TAing at the second bootcamp. And I TA'd at the second bootcamp for 2 different cohorts. The first one, it was wonderful to see, get that same sort of, the same student experience, because I was new to this bootcamp. I hadn't gone through it. I was seeing things that you could do in a different light. I was seeing the JavaScript that I had written from a different perspective and a different teaching style. So I was still learning that first cohort. The second cohort I did at the Georgia Tech Bootcamp, because I had already gone through the materials once, it was the value in it for me was sort of recognizing how far I had come and how far I had grown to where, like during the first cohort that I taught at, I would have to sort of review all the materials, review all the homework before I could help someone who had a question. And I would do that, so I was on top of the game, but it was still sort of, a frantic, like, oh my gosh, what if I don't know what a student's asking me? The second time around, though, I would not have to review. I wouldn't have to look at any materials, and I could just sort of let my brain do the processing because I had primed it for that. And that was incredibly valuable to get that recognition that I am learning, I have learned, I have gotten this far in my journey. And I think if you have the opportunity to be a teaching assistant or work at a coding bootcamp after you graduate, it's definitely incredibly valuable, and you should look into that opportunity and try and find some.
That's great advice. As someone who took that advice, TA is an amazing educational experience for the TA. Speaking of advice, we always like to ask our guests for a recommendation, something that you wish you'd known about years ago, something that makes your life easier, something that helps you with work-life balance. It can be literally anything from a way of thinking to a material possession to a product or service. We have no restrictions. Something that makes your life easier that one of our listeners might need to hear about.
Perfect.
What is your life recommendation?
Great. I have two. I have one that's specific to coding, and it is a newsletter called Code with Veni, Veni.
Love her.
Are you following that too? Veni Kunche she works in Washington, D.C., and she is just very passionate about getting other women and underrepresented minorities into tech. So she puts out a newsletter with amazing resources and recommendations, I think at a monthly interval. So I think her website is codewithveni.com, and we can link it up, I'm sure, as well. But I really recommend that. The second thing is I have just recently started getting into doing a walk at my lunchtime, and that has changed everything. I would usually just eat lunch at my desk and like sort of keep coding or maybe read a blog post while I was lunching. And only in the past couple of months have I sort of forced myself to go outside and like get some fresh air, even if it's 15, 20 minutes. And it's made my days so much brighter and more, I guess, calm. So I highly recommend doing that.
The dreaded fresh air and sunlight. That's great advice, man.
None of that.
They always say success leaves clues. And as you listen to our podcast, you're not the very first person that's recommended, like exercise. Doing something that allows you to unplug and to relax and to, disconnect from tech and basically recharge your batteries. And doing a walk at lunch exactly fulfills that requirement. And I think that's great advice. Yes. One of the other requirements that we ask for you to provide recommendations is, as we've talked about how you got into tech, how you did a TA, how you got your first job. Getting into tech, the job interview is something that's unique compared to any other type of job that you might have. What recommendation can you give to our listeners on how to prepare for the job interview?
Yes. I think the best thing I can give as advice would be to find the one project that you've done either in your bootcamp or as you've been preparing for your interviews. Find that one. It doesn't need to be many, just the one project that you've done that you can really highlight, you can really talk about and get deep into it, because interviewers are usually, I would say 95 to 100% of the time, are only going to ask you about one project that you've done. So focus on, I would say, prepare questions and prepare talking points about one project that you're really proud of and that you can give a lot of detail and sort of technical depth to. And be sure that you have that down pat, because they will ask you, and you don't need to tell them every single project, but if you have one that you are confident about, that really makes all the difference in my mind.
That is awesome advice. That is awesome advice. You've been an absolute delight to have on the show. First of all, thank you so much. No, I mean, you exemplify changing your life, making awesome choices, and getting where you want to be from a different place. And I hope that our listeners can take your journey and apply it to their own. And I just thank you so much for making the time for us.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Listeners, thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next week. As always, this has been the CodePrep Podcast. We will see you next time.